On to Senator Dagenet.
Monsieur le Président, merci à nos deux.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you to our two witnesses. I'll give them the time to put their earpieces on. I listened to your evidence and the discussion around the table. I understand that you have mentioned that the franchise, the right to vote, is constitutional. It's been so for many years. But don't you think that with time, laws should be modernized or harmonized with what is actually going on? I'll give you an example. 10 years ago or so, we didn't use seat belts, but now we're obliged to use seat belts. 10 years ago or so, you didn't have to show ID to get on a plane, but now you have to do. And in fact, in the past, you could go up to the door of Parliament and be welcomed without ID. It's not like it is today, where you have to have your identification. You can't even get into the East Block here without showing a piece of identification. So we have modernized the way we do things, and don't you think modernization to avoid fraud should be considered in this area?
I think, yes, you're absolutely. Update election laws over time, and ideally that would be done on the basis of a study by parliamentary committee with the advice and support of the Chief Electoral Officer, and that sweeping dramatic changes are probably not the best way to ensure widespread consensus and legitimacy for the result. The UK is taking multiple years and is actively consulting as the Speaker's panel on electoral law. So all parties are having input into it, and it's mandatory under all the election laws. There are about 38 pieces of legislation in the UK that the head of the Electoral Commission be consulted before changes are introduced. That's a preferred approach, and I've looked at the American situation, and they have a bipartisan commission which is deadlocked now. They can't go anywhere. So there's always accusations flying around that either the Republicans or the Democrats are trying to gain political advantage. That, over time, corrodes the acceptance of election law by everybody involved, and voters no longer have the level of trust that they should have, that the process is fair and the playing field is even and balanced and so on. So I agree with you. Let's, earlier it was stated that, I think someone stated that Elections Canada, I guess Professor Wiseman stated that Elections Canada is a big bureaucracy. Yes, and it should be held accountable, and it should be pushed to improve its operation. And I recall a letter written by all the officers of Parliament to Parliament, both houses, insisting that you hold us more accountable for our money, for our staffing, for our actions, and so on. It's an unfulfilled request as far as I'm concerned, and I watch that world very closely. There's not enough attention on an ongoing basis by committees of either house to the activities of the 8 or so officers of Parliament, including Elections Canada. It shouldn't get unilateral authority. It should be held accountable. It's got you need the right balance between independence and accountability. So I just wanted to throw that in.
Monsieur Wiseman, vous avez un commentaire?
Do you have a comment, Mr. Wiseman?
Senator Schweiel, I learned from both of you. I agree about modernization, and what you say sounds reasonable to me. I mean, it's very apparent when you come onto Parliament now, about identification and so on. But, there is an excellent issue here. I mean, part of the job of the Senate is to defend the rights of minorities and the less privileged, although John A. Macdonald thought the rich were a minority, and thus we needed the Senate for that. So we have conflicting views here. I mean, the reason I took the position I did on vouching, well, first off, I still want to keep it in perspective. I know we hired 226,000 people last year to work at these polls. That means there were at least twice as many poll workers as there were people vouched for. So that's about 1 per poll. It's not very high, but there is a principle here. We can't deny anyone the vote. And I also don't believe that there has been widespread fraud. But I also heard what the minister said, and he said, yeah, but nobody's investigated this. I believe there is an element of paranoia about fraud, and remember, we had serial vouching before, and I think there was a case in Vancouver in, I don't know if it was 2004, 2006, where one person vouched for, all these people in East Vancouver, and that raised hackles and concerns. I'm more interested in the outcomes of elections and what happens. I'm not a lawyer, I'm not a constitutional lawyer, I don't deal with rights as much, and I think, in the totality, it's not going to, the upshot isn't going to be all that different. It's not going to be as bad as the critics make out of this bill, and it's not going to deliver the benefits that the sponsors of this bill have made out, and maybe it just contributes to, it's another vehicle for partisan debate. My impression was when I didn't sign the letter by my 158 colleagues. I think Professor Thomas was one. And
I did not sign.
No. And my feeling was, well, okay, I wonder how many of these people voted for the government party to begin with, and if the government changed its position, would they actually change their attitude too? Often what you get is a reflex that if it comes from so-and-so, it's got to be bad, or if it comes from such and such, it's got to be good. So this has been caught up in a partisan fight. Professor Thomas is very wise on this. He has studied this in an intense way that I haven't, and I think it's best if we move toward an electoral regime in which there is consensus. And I don't know when we came about to this consensus that Elections Canada should be, out there spending all this money trying to convince people that they have to go out to vote.
Merci. Merci.
Senator Moore.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, witnesses, for being here. I want to follow up, if I could, on Senator Baker's question about compelling the Commissioner of Canada Elections having the authority to compel witnesses to come forward and testify when he or she knows there's something that's not right, and it looks like the law is being violated. And that happened in the robocall situation. Mr. Justice Mosley found it was fraudulent activity. Yet under the proposed, this bill that we have before us, it does not give that commissioner the authority to compel. It only provides for the keeping of records for 1 year, and the records need not include the key element of the phone number of the person contacted. So, we know that these provisions don't go far enough. We know what it can lead to. We saw it happen in Mr. Justice Mosley's decision. So, do you have any comments about that? And this is, it's legalese, it's also practical thinking about trying to run the best election we can do, that we can run. So do you have any, either of you or both have any comments on that, please?
Well, maybe I'll start. One of the things I've discovered studying these matters over the years now is that the devil is often in the details, that we need election law, structures, procedures, and policies and so on that connect to some fundamental principles and values. And that's an art form, not a science. Political scientists and lawyers, dare I say, can't say with precision that you'll get just the right balance in all of this. I served as the first party allowance commissioner in Manitoba a year or two ago, appointed through after all party consultation to decide the future of annual per vote subsidies paid to political parties. And once you got past debating some of the principles, you then had to put it down in black and white. And that's when the real challenges begin. It's easy to have the abstract discussions that academics love to have, but the real tricky part is to say, well, how do you work this out in a way that works? So that's a bit of a tangent. I think in 5 provinces now, the electoral commissioner or the CEO of the elections body, is it 6, Mr. Baker? Yeah, Senator Baker, has the power to compel testimony. In the UK, it's they have that authority under the Electoral Commission. I interviewed Mr. Wardle, the executive director, and it is useful to the body. And again, you might think, well, it's arbitrary, it's unfair, you know. But in fact, it can be very fair to the person against whom complaints have been raised and violations are
Clear the
involved.
air as soon as possible.
And the UK, again, had issued a discussion paper on enforcement policy, and they went through step by step the procedural safeguards to ensure natural justice, due process for people who are accused. It's not just about naming, blaming, and shaming. It's about making sure that the law is upheld, in particular its legal requirements, but also the spirit of the law. And you should give the enforcement body a toolkit that has a continuum of instruments available to him to ensure that parties and candidates come into compliance with the law. And you shouldn't start by saying, let's take them to court. And the law in Canada is rigged towards court prosecutions. It's criminal code, and you don't have, Elections Canada doesn't have the authority to use secondary legislation or delegated legislative authority. Other countries that I've looked at in the study I mentioned have that authority, and they're going in that direction. Again, I'll stop, Mr. Chair. I'm taking up the airtime.
Professor Wiseman?
I think the most outrageous upshot of the last election was the voter interference calls in Guelph, definitely. We have charges and elsewhere as well. And I think the greatest failing of the act is that witnesses are not being compelled. We know there are people right now who could shed light on this, and I believe people of good faith, have positive values, want this. And I think this standard that I don't like this idea that Elections Canada cannot share information with us when they get reports about alleged fraud or whatever misbehavior. And I agree with Professor Thomas. If you could compel witnesses, we often have the opportunity to clear these things up earlier. It saddens me that, like, I'm thinking of cases we've had for the MPs from Peterborough and Labrador. Well, here from Peterborough, now we're there's some procedure against the MP on the basis of not the last election, what happened in 2008. Why is it taking so long? That discredits the system.
It does.
And then another discrediting, I thought in Labrador, why are we having a by-election right away before we get... It was as if we had a by-election right away and the member got re-elected, that would sort of absolve what had happened. I don't think that's proper, either. At the same time, what saddens me, if I may say so, is that Canadians feel, I think on the whole, we do have a democratic system, and even these kinds of errors will not change the balance of who's going to win and who's going to lose. Because I think back, why did we have the 2011 election? For the first time in Canadian history, a government was brought down, I believe, for demonstrating contempt for Parliament.
That's right.
And one of the parties said that was the issue in the campaign. And we know what happened to that party. And that didn't, but, for us who are political junkies and political scientists who appreciate how Parliament works, that was significant. But,
Well
over.
Sorry.